Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine that when you open them again, your world is gone. The soft bed you know replaced by a rough straw mat on a cold, damp floor. The gentle hum of cars and distant city lights lost to a dark silence pierced only by the faint cries of animals and the crackle of a smoky hearth. Now step outside. You're no longer in your time. A rooster crows, villagers trudge past you with hollow eyes, and somewhere in the distance a bell tolls, not to mark the hour, but to warn of bodies being carted away, of plague whispered from door to door. Stay with me, because only by walking all the way through this shadowed, breathtaking journey will you see how the darkest nights of the past helped kindle the very dawn you wake to now. You wake not in your familiar soft bed, but on a lumpy straw mattress that scratches against your skin. The chill of the air bites at your face, and as you shift, the musty scent of damp stone, old smoke, and earth fills your lungs. A faint candle sputters nearby, casting long, nervous shadows across rough-hewn walls. You blink, trying to banish the haze of sleep, but nothing feels right. This isn't your room. This isn't your time. Your heart stumbles in your chest as the realization settles heavy in your gut. Somehow, by a twist of fate or the odd machinery of dreams, you've landed in a world centuries removed from everything you've ever known. A world where comfort is scarce, the night is truly dark, and life answers to forces both seen and unseen. You rise slowly, joints stiff from sleeping on the unyielding mattress. The thin blanket slides to the floor. The rush of cold air is immediate. Your breath makes faint clouds. Somewhere outside, you hear the lowing of cattle, a rooster crowing insistently. The sounds seep through the walls like a distant memory you can't quite place. Pushing aside a heavy wooden door, you step into a cramped lane of packed dirt and scattered straw. The village is waking. Thin threads of smoke rise from rough stone chimneys. Chickens dart across your path, startled by your clumsy steps. Farther off, a woman in a coarse wool dress bends over a bucket, splashing water over her hands, her breath fogging in the early light. Her eyes meet yours for the briefest moment, curious but unsurprised, as if strangers often appear from nowhere. You walk on, drawn by the swirl of new sensations. Every texture and sound feels sharper. The bark of a dog, the creak of a wooden cartwheel, the distant ring of a hammer on metal. Life is already bustling, even though the sun still hovers low, sending faint golden rays across a sea of muddy rooftops.
Soon, you notice figures gathering in the open square at the heart of the village. A cluster of men with sun-darkened faces and calloused hands speak in hushed voices, sharing nods and tired smiles. Children scamper about, wooden toys in hand, squealing with delight when a playful puppy nips at their heels. Here, you begin to grasp just how closely woven together these people's lives are. Every face etched by labor, every gesture part of an intricate dance that binds the community. Your feet carry you onward, through narrow passageways where wooden beams lean precariously overhead, the scent of livestock and hay almost overwhelming. You pass by modest cottages, their small windows like dark eyes. Each one shelters families whose days begin before dawn and end long after dusk, ruled by the demands of soil and season. A farmer's voice calls out sharply. He's urging a hulking ox into harness, its broad shoulders dusted with the pale frost of early morning. Nearby, a girl with tangled hair scatters feed for chickens, laughing when they peck greedily at her feet. The simplicity of these moments stirs something inside you, a contrast so stark to your own world's hurried pace that you almost envy their unpretentious certainty. A bell sounds. clear and solemn, rolling over the rooftops. Heads turn instinctively toward the small stone church at the village edge. The bell is not just marking hours, it's stitching lives together, calling them to prayer, reminding them of duties owed both to heaven and to each other. Without realizing, you find yourself drifting with the crowd, past the worn threshold of the church. Inside, light filters through tiny stained glass panes, coloring the air with trembling reds and blues. The scent of incense mingles with the cool draft that follows you in. When the service ends, villagers file out quietly, crossing themselves, returning to tasks waiting at home or in the fields. You follow them back into daylight that's grown brighter, gentler now. The sun rests higher, warming your shoulders as you wander on. Beyond the village stretch open fields, dark soil turned in neat rows, guarded by hedgerows where sparrows dart and sing. A farmer, broad-shouldered and solemn, guides a plow behind his ox. Each furrow is laid down with methodical care, the earth breathing a faint, rich smell. As you watch, sweat beads on his brow, but there is no sign of complaint. His life, their lives, depend on coaxing this stubborn land to yield enough to last another winter.
Near him, other peasants bend low to plant or to weed, their backs curved like question marks. A young boy runs barefoot between them, chasing a flitting butterfly with all the joy his elders can scarcely afford. You stand a while, absorbing this quiet ballet of necessity, until the rhythm of it slows your own racing mind. Here, you think, hardship is constant, yet there's a grace in how they move through it together. When the work pauses, families gather again in their cramped cottages. Inside one dim room, you sit shoulder to shoulder with a farmer's household, sharing a coarse wooden table. The meal is simple: barley porridge, yesterday's bread dipped in thin ale. The children's laughter brightens the shadows, and an old grandmother hums a tune that might be centuries old. There's little wealth here, but a palpable bond ties them close. You catch fragments of stories passed down like treasures, tales of ancestors who survived hard winters, or neighbors lost to sickness long ago, all woven into the fabric of their daily life. That evening, the air grows dense with wood smoke. Crickets begin their low chorus outside. You lie back on the straw mattress again, rough and scratchy, but somehow less alien now. Flickering candlelight dances across the walls, painting shapes that drift and melt. As your eyes close, your thoughts spiral into the mystery of how you've come to walk these muddy lanes, breathe this heavy air, feel your heart ache at the fragile beauty of these humble moments. Somewhere in that borderland between waking and sleep, a story unfolds. You see a boy not so different from the one who chased butterflies today, except his path will diverge in astonishing ways. Born in a village much like this, he starts life with the same dirt under his nails, the same tattered tunic. But fortune or fate intervenes. A local lord notices his sharp eyes, his sure hands, and takes him as a squire. The boy's name is William, though he's yet unaware that history will remember it long after his bones turn to dust. As you drift deeper, scenes shift. William learns to ride, to wield a sword, to bow before nobility, yet never forget the weight of plowing soil. He grows tall, shoulders broad, with training and hunger alike. His mind is quick, too quick to be satisfied with mere service. In time, his talents draw the eye of a powerful duke across the sea, a man whose ambitions stretch well beyond the neat fields of Normandy. Under this duke's banner, William becomes more than a peasant's son. He becomes a knight, then a lord in his own right.
And when the English crown wavers, uncertain in the hands of rival claimants, William sees his chance. In your mind's eye, you stand on a wind-battered coast. Ships bob in the gray channel, sails taut with the promise of conquest. The clash of steel follows. Shields splinter, horses rear. Warriors shout oaths to heavens that seem deaf to their struggles. At Hastings, William's clever feigned retreat draws the defenders out, their shield wall breaking like ice beneath a sudden thaw. By day's end, the ground is littered with discarded arms and silent forms. William stands victorious, crowned in a cold abbey come December, the weight of England settling heavy on his shoulders. Years slide by. Across rolling hills, castles sprout like armored giants. Wooden palisades give way to soaring stone keeps. Inside these walls, lords feast and plot beneath banners heavy with embroidery, their tables laden with roasted meats and golden goblets. Below, in bustling baileys, blacksmiths hammer swords that may one day decide another kingdom's fate. Fletchers trim arrows by candlelight, and stable hands swap rumors as they curry sleek war horses. Each castle becomes both fortress and theater, staging intrigues that ripple across the land far beyond their moats. Yet beyond these fortresses of ambition, another power rises, silent, austere, relentless. Monasteries bloom where once only wildflowers grew. Within their cloisters, monks in coarse habits bend over parchment, ink staining their fingers as they copy the wisdom of ancients and saints alike. Their chants echo down cool stone corridors, threads of sound tying earth to something vast and unseen. Here you glimpse devotion so absolute it frightens you, even as it soothes. You will see many more lives. You will watch crusaders sew crosses to their tunics, setting forth on dusty roads toward Jerusalem. You will stand on sun-bleached walls, hear the clash of blades in narrow streets, feel the hollow triumph as new rulers replace old ones, leaving scars on the very stones. You will walk markets where merchants from Venice or Cairo haggle over bolts of silk and fragrant spices. You will listen to scholars in smoky halls argue over Aristotle, their Latin spilling out like music. And you will stand again in quiet fields where peasants still coax life from the soil, still gather at dusk to share bread and stories. Even as plagues sweep through, silent, pitiless, they cling to small joys, a warm hearth, a whispered prayer, a child's bright laughter. Always the thread of humanity weaves on.
When you finally wake, your own familiar ceiling above you, the echo of bells still hums faintly in your chest. The centuries peel away like morning mist, yet something inside you remains changed. You carry with you the weight of countless lives lived before yours, their toils, dreams, quiet triumphs, all layered beneath the skin of your own time. And perhaps, just perhaps, you understand now that history isn't only stories and books. It's breath and blood, sweat on a brow, a mother's hand resting on her child's head, the same then as now. You rise with a heart newly tender to the fragile wonder of simply being alive, aware that your story, too, is but one bright strand in the immense, unending tapestry of all who've ever lived. The first breath you take outside the cramped little room tastes of damp hay and something sharper, the pungent tang of animals, soil freshly turned, wood smoke purling lazily from low stone chimneys. Around you, a village stirs to life under the cautious watch of a pale sun. Chickens scatter from underfoot, squawking their protest as you nearly trip over a worn bucket left by a doorway. A rooster lifts his throat and sends out a piercing crow that bounces down the narrow lane, answered by others until the entire hamlet seems to vibrate with this rough morning chorus. Your feet carry you further into the waking day. Rough cottages line the muddy path, their timber frames darkened with years of weather, thatched roofs hunched low as if to ward off the lingering cold. Doors stand ajar. From within come muffled voices, clinks of metal against pottery, the gentle scolding of a mother as she coaxes a sleepy child to rise. A boy dashes past you barefoot, a thin tunic flapping about his knees. He brandishes a stick like a knight's lance, jousting at invisible foes with a high, breathless laugh. Beyond him, a bent old man drags a squeaking cart loaded with bundles of rushes. He pauses to wipe sweat from his brow, nods politely, and trudges on. Farther along, two women stand in a doorway gossiping in quick, low tones, flour-dusted hands resting on their hips. One gestures animatedly toward a neighboring yard where goats nibble at a makeshift fence, as if scolding them for their escape attempts. Each step reveals new fragments of village life. You pass a lean dog rooting through scraps beside a pig pen, then draw aside hastily as a pair of men lead a stubborn ox down the lane. Its hooves churn the mud, nostrils steaming. The men slap its flanks with sticks and mutter curses under their breath. Though there's no real anger there, only the tired familiarity of those who rise each day to the same relentless labors. Somewhere close by, a hammer strikes iron. You follow the sound to a small smithy, little more than an open shed with a stone hearth blazing inside. Sparks leap like tiny spirits as the blacksmith bends over an anvil, shaping glowing metal with calm precision. His apprentice pumps the bellows, cheeks puffed, eyes wide with concentration. The air is thick with the sense of burning charcoal and hot steel. Watching them, you feel oddly anchored, as if this rhythm of work, this simple, urgent necessity, makes more sense than anything your old life ever offered. The lane opens suddenly into a wider space. At the center stands a rough-hewn cross, a patch of churned ground at its base where locals gather on feast days. Now it's just a thoroughfare for clucking hens and a few merchants setting up stalls. Their carts bear onions strung like beads, wheels of pale cheese, clay pots whose shapes seem charmingly lopsided. A man unloads bolts of coarse woolen cloth, spreading them over the cart's edge and calling out prices in a friendly sing-song meant more to start the day than to lure buyers so early. As you linger there, a curious feeling grows, not of being a stranger, but almost the opposite. This world draws you in. Its earthy smell clings to your clothes. The low murmur of greetings exchanged by passing neighbors begins to soothe you. Even the ruts of the muddy road seem to beckon you deeper into this shared existence, where every person knows his place, yet weaves 1,000 small acts of care and obligation into the fabric of the community. A little girl, her hair tangled into a single thick braid, skips past holding a wooden doll. She smiles shyly at you before darting back to her mother's side. In that moment, something loosens in your chest. Whatever distance you once felt from this life begins to narrow, replaced by a cautious wonder at how seamlessly the day folds around these people, and you, if only you let it. Soon, the village begins to thin out. Beyond the last scattered cottages, fields stretch under the strengthening sun, a patchwork of greens and browns divided by rough fences and low hedges. You see figures at work already, bending and straightening with a steady patience that seems to pulse from the land itself. Drawn onward, you make your way down a narrow track, your boots sinking into soft earth, and approach the heart of this ceaseless labor. At the edge of one field, a farmer stands behind a wooden plow strapped to a broad, slow-moving ox. Each step the beast takes drives the blade into the soil with a moist sigh, turning rich brown furrows that release the raw scent of growing things. The man encourages the ox with low words and a gentle tug on the reins, pausing now and then to rest a hand on its flank as if sharing the burden. Not far off, his wife and older children gather stones from between the rows, piling them into small cairns to clear the way for seed. You watch as they work in concert, hardly speaking. Their movements tell the story, where to lift, where to shift, when to pause to straighten aching backs. In this quiet cooperation lies a kind of intimacy modern people rarely glimpse. Here, survival isn't an abstract concern. It's a shared endeavor etched into every palm, every bent back, every line around tired eyes. Farther down, in another plot of land, you see clusters of younger children crouched low. They pat dark soil over tiny shoots with careful hands, giggling when one points out a fat worm wriggling just beneath the surface. A grandmother stoops with them, her scarf tied tightly under her chin, eyes crinkling with gentle amusement. Even in toil, these families find moments of lightness, laughter that rings across the fields, small contests to see who can gather the most weeds or stones. As the sun climbs higher, sweat beads on every brow, faces redden, yet the work does not stop. A sense of urgency hangs over them. These rows must be ready. These seeds must take root if they hope to fill their tables come the leaner months. A lull in planting might mean an empty pot by winter's fireside. Watching, you begin to grasp how time itself feels different here, measured not by clocks or schedules, but by the slow turning of seasons and the constant needs of earth and belly. When at last they pause to rest, you sit among them on the edge of a field. The meal is as simple as the morning: a crust of bread, a wedge of sharp cheese, and a small earthen cup of weak ale, passed hand to hand. No one complains of the fare. They eat with quiet gratitude, savoring each bite as though it were a rare delicacy. Between mouthfuls, they share low conversations about weather, the promise of rain, rumors of a distant fair, where merchants might bring bright dyes and iron tools. It is in these easy murmurs that the true soul of the village reveals itself, not in grand pronouncements or lofty prayers, but in the small hopes carried like fragile treasures from one day to the next. You find yourself speaking little, content just to listen, to feel the rough sun-warmed grass beneath you, to watch a kestrel wheel lazy circles overhead. In this moment, you belong here as surely as any of them.
A short while later, the children rise first, chasing one another in dizzy loops across the furrows. Their shouts and laughter dance through the warm air. The adults stretch slowly, joints popping, and return to their labors with quiet resolve. Life continues, unglamorous but rich in ways your old self might never have noticed. As you stand and dust off your hands, a young man nearby flashes you a quick grin before he shoulders his hoe and heads back to work. You smile in return, feeling that unfamiliar pull again, the delicate thread that ties each person here to every other. It isn't wealth that binds them, nor ambition. It's the steady, unspoken promise that tomorrow they will all rise again together, answer the same rooster's call, and shape their days with the same honest toil. And without quite realizing it, you take your first step back toward the village with a lighter heart, already wondering what stories the evening hearth might bring. The sun climbs with unhurried grace above the low hills, brushing the fields in a gentle wash of gold. Its warmth stretches long fingers across your shoulders, banishing the last of the dawn's chill. Around you, the world stirs in earnest. Birds flit from hedge to fence post with bright, urgent calls, and the distant bark of a dog carries across the still air. Already, the village has emptied into the fields, every able hand called to the same relentless purpose. You take your place among the rows, gripping the worn wooden handles of a hoe that feels awkward at first, but soon settles into your palms as if it's always belonged there. A deep furrow of soil lies ahead, dark and damp, its rich scent rising with each careful turn. Beside you, men and women work shoulder to shoulder, their sleeves rolled up, forearms streaked with dirt. No one wastes breath on complaint. The hush is broken only by the rhythm of tools biting into earth and the occasional grunt as someone shifts a heavy clod aside.
Every so often, you pause to straighten your back and draw in a lungful of air that tastes of grass and the faint sweetness of flowering hedgerows. Your muscles tighten and release with a new kind of ache, unfamiliar, yet not unpleasant. It's a clean pain, proof that you're here, part of something larger than yourself. The sun creeps higher, drying beads of sweat that gather at your temples. You swipe them away with a dusty sleeve, then press on. Nearby, an older man moves with quiet efficiency. His face is seamed with lines deep as carved wood, his hair bound at the nape by a scrap of leather. Watching him, you see how he sets his weight, how he rocks forward just so, letting gravity and balance share the burden. You try to mimic his method and find your own work grows easier, your strokes more sure. He notices and gives you a small approving nod before returning to his steady toil. A little farther off, a pair of sisters laugh softly as they trade barbs about who is the lazier worker. Their banter has the lightness of long familiarity, underscored by bright eyes and quick hands. Even here, even amid labor that will stretch until evening dims the sky, moments of levity slip in like sunbeams through broken clouds. Time folds strangely out here. Minutes blur into hours under the sun's slow arc. You fall into a rhythm guided by simple necessity. Bend, lift, scatter stones, press down stray shoots, move on. The breeze picks up at times, rustling through rows of young grain and carrying the scent of distant wood fires. Your mind quiets. Thoughts drift like leaves on a slow stream. All that matters is the feel of the soil under your boots and the gentle pull in your shoulders as you work alongside these people who, though strangers still, labor with you as if you've always belonged. By midday, your stomach reminds you how long it's been since the morning's crust of bread. A break is called almost without words, a communal easing of effort that sweeps down the lines. Tools are set aside, people gather in small knots under the lean shadow of a tree or by a heap of rocks that serves as a seat. Someone passes a flask, another tears a round loaf into coarse chunks. A girl brings out a small clay pot of thick, salted curds that's shared with shy generosity. You eat slowly, savoring each bite, finding that simple fare has a richness unknown to your old life. Conversation drifts in and out. One man wonders aloud if there'll be rain before the week's end. A woman answers that her knees always warn her of bad weather, and today they've kept silent. A boy listens wide-eyed as another laborer recounts seeing a stag near the woods at dawn, its antlers wreathed in cobwebs glinting like silver. The story earns playful scoffs, but you catch the boy glancing toward the tree line as if hoping to glimpse that ghostly vision himself. When the pause ends, it's almost a relief to return to work. Your body, for all its weariness, craves the rhythm, the small victories of each row cleared or bed readied for seed. Afternoon sunlight bathes the fields in a warm, forgiving glow, softening harsh lines and turning sweat to bright jewels on every brow. In these hours, the day feels endless, a wide canvas stretched under the sky, painted with honest effort and quiet companionship. As the sun tilts toward the horizon, the pace finally slackens. Tools are gathered up, oxen led away to waiting troughs. Laughter comes easier now, voices rising in soft chorus against the hush of coming dusk. You find yourself walking back toward the village with them, feet heavy, but spirit strangely buoyant, carried along by the low hum of shared fatigue and the promise of rest. A woman beside you hums a lilting tune that might be older than any house you've seen, her hand resting lightly on your arm as if to guide you home. And though your muscles protest every step, there's a part of you that almost hopes tomorrow will be just the same,
the sun rising once more to pull you all from sleep and set your hands back to the simple, sustaining work of turning earth to life. The last threads of daylight stretch long across the village as you make your way back along the rutted lane. Smoke coils lazily from low chimneys, carrying with it the scent of peat and roasting roots. The sounds of the fields fade behind you, replaced with soft voices and the muted clatter of evening preparations. Chickens have found their roosts, goats nuzzle close to their pens, even the dogs seem to tread more softly now, as if mindful of this gentle hour when daylight loosens its grip. Pushing open a roughed wooden door, you step inside a dim room that pulses with quiet life. The walls are of packed earth and stone, stitched here and there with bundles of straw to keep out drafts. A small hearth cradles a modest fire, the flames licking at a blackened pot from which drifts a simple, savory aroma. A woman with kind eyes lifts the lid, stirs carefully, then sets it aside to cool. Her hair is bound in a faded kerchief, hands chapped from work, but sure and quick. 2 children sit cross-legged on the hard-packed floor, whispering conspiratorially over a carved piece of wood that might be a toy soldier or perhaps a tiny plow. An older boy helps his father mend a harness strap near the door, thick fingers, awkward but eager to learn the careful threading of leather. When they look up and see you, their faces soften with recognition. The father nodding, as if to say, "Yes, another day done, and here we are together again."
The table is little more than a plank set on stout legs, but it stands ready, waiting like a silent witness to the family's shared hours. Rough bowls are laid out, a loaf of coarse bread torn into generous hunks beside them. A wedge of hard cheese rests on a small board, already flecked with crumbs. A crock holds turnips, soft and fragrant from their long simmer in the pot. There is no luxury here, no garnish or gilded vessel, but there is enough, and in this small room, enough feels almost like abundance. You take your seat among them, knees brushing the next person's. Hands fold in brief silence, a murmured grace flowing low over the table. Then bowls are filled, bread passed hand to hand. The children dive in with earnest hunger, laughing when one splutters over a mouthful too hot. Their mother wipes a smudge from her daughter's chin with the edge of her sleeve, smiling with tired tenderness. Talk begins in easy trickles. They speak of the day's labors, whose ox pulled best, how the new plow handles the stubborn patches near the wood. The father wonders aloud if the weather will hold, if the sun tomorrow will burn off the lingering wet that threatens to rot seed before it can sprout. His wife answers with a shrug, her eyes on the small flames. "If the good Lord wills it," she says simply, and no one argues the point. Then come snippets of more delicate concerns. A neighbor's cow took ill, might not see another moon. A traveling merchant passed through 3 days ago, boasting of bright cloth from distant cities. Someone heard the reeve will be around next week to tally what each family owes. Taxes weighed out not in coins most never see, but in sacks of grain, bundles of flax, young chickens plucked reluctantly from roosts. A collective sigh circles the table at this, yet it is a resigned sound, not bitter. They have lived under such burdens all their lives. Now and again, the children interject small stories of their own. Who raced fastest down the lane? Who found the biggest snail beneath the fence post? Their laughter knits the rim closer, threads of brightness weaving through the duller cloth of grown-up worries. Even the father, stern lines deep around his mouth, can't help but chuckle when his youngest proudly declares she will keep a snail as a pet, much to her mother's exaggerated dismay. As the bowls empty and the bread dwindles to crumbs, talk slows to a gentle hum. A hush grows, filled by the crackle of the fire and the occasional sigh as muscles relax into the honest weariness earned by a full day's work. The woman rises to clear away the dishes, setting them by the door for scrubbing come morning. One by one, the children slip to a low pallet near the wall, curling together under a patchwork of worn wool and linen. You sit there a moment longer, savoring this fragile peace. The glow of the hearth sets their faces in soft relief, illuminating the quiet pride that rests in these people. Pride not of riches or renown, but of having tended their piece of earth, fed their young, and met the day's trials side by side. When at last you lay down on your own pallet of straw, close enough to hear the steady breathing of this family around you, it strikes you just how profoundly these humble rituals bind them. Shared bread, shared stories, shared silence. These are the customs that hold the fabric of their world together, stitching souls to each other and to the land in ways deeper than any decree of king or priest. And as your eyes grow heavy, you think that perhaps this simple table, this small circle of voices, is where the heart of this strange age truly beats. Night gathers slowly, like ink spilling across the edges of the sky. The last ember of daylight fades beyond the low rooftops, leaving only the trembling glow of a few candles and the pulsing heart of the small hearth. Around you, the family settles into their evening rhythms, with the soft inevitability of water finding its course. The mother smooths a blanket over her youngest child's shoulders, the father stretches his legs toward the fading warmth of the fire, eyes half closed as though already chasing some gentle dream. You ease yourself onto the straw-stuffed mattress set against the far wall. It rustles beneath you, prickling your skin through the thin weave of your tunic. A faint scent rises from it, dry grass mixed with something older, more human, like the echo of all the nights its cradled bodies worn from toil. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding and stare up at the low wooden beams overhead. The ceiling is rough, darkened with age and smoke, the knots in the timber forming strange shapes if you look too long. In this dim hush, your thoughts drift in restless currents. You find yourself turning over the quiet power of the day just past. How the sun climbed and fell again regardless of human plans. How hands clawed at stubborn earth to plant fragile hopes in its depths, never certain if the harvest would be kind or cruel. How children laughed without guarantee of tomorrow. How parents guarded small joys like treasures against the slow grind of mead.
It strikes you with sudden force how little control anyone here truly has. A bad storm, an early frost, a sickness sweeping through the livestock or the people themselves. Any of these could tilt their delicate balance into hardship no one can soften. They live so near to the edge, yet carry on with a patience you can't quite comprehend. Each dawn a tacit agreement to try again, to trust that the land and the heavens might favor them one day longer. Lying there, you feel small in a way that is strangely tender. This world does not revolve around your ambitions or fears. It moves with a slow, indifferent grace that you are merely fortunate to witness. The worries that once consumed you, deadlines, arguments, long-forgotten disappointments, feel pale and weightless compared to the immense, simple struggle of coaxing life from soil, of raising children who might someday do the same. A soft sound pulls you from your reverie. A girl's faint sigh as she rolls over on her mat, seeking the comfort of her mother's shoulder. The fire sighs too, sending a last warm breath into the cool air. A thin draft slips under the door, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. Somewhere beyond the walls, an owl calls once, twice, its voice hollow and eternal. Your eyelids grow heavy. As sleep seeps in, You hold on to one fragile thought, that perhaps there is a quiet dignity in this life, precisely because so much lies beyond human shaping. Perhaps it is not about bending the world to your will, but about learning to live within its mysterious, indifferent mercy. The thought is comforting in a way that surprises you, softening the hard edges of uncertainty. And so you close your eyes at last, surrendering to the slow breath of the house around you, to the deep pull of night that has closed over countless generations before you and will close over countless more after. In this darkness, under these beams blackened by time, you drift into a sleep as old as the fields outside, your final waking awareness a simple, humble wonder that any of this exists at all. The morning comes wrapped in a gentle gray mist that clings to rooftops and curls through the narrow lanes like a cautious animal. You sit outside the cottage door, a coarse woolen cloak drawn tight against the damp, watching villagers drift into the day's first tasks. A woman scatters seed to a cluster of impatient chickens. A pair of boys chase each other around a cart piled high with sacks of barley, laughing breathlessly until one trips and lands in the mud. Nearby, your neighbor, a lean man with a face weathered by sun and years, rests on an overturned bucket, a basket of mended tools at his feet. His hands are busy, but his eyes are far off.
When you greet him, he glances up with a faint, crooked smile. Then, almost unprompted, he begins to speak, his voice low and rough-edged, as though brushing dust from memories long undisturbed. "There was a lad once," he says, "from a village much like this one, maybe even poorer if you can imagine. His name was William. Nothing special to look at, they say, skinny as a willow shoot and just as likely to bend under a hard word. His father worked a small strip of land that barely kept them in bread through the lean months. Most expected the boy would grow to do the same, marry some lass from a hut 2 doors over, and spend his life coaxing wheat from tired soil." He pauses, eyes narrowing with a faint glint of amusement. But life's a sly thing. It doesn't always keep to the paths we think are laid down. One year, the local lord came through, inspecting his holdings. He brought with him a train of knights and men-at-arms, a gleaming sight for folk who spent their days ankle-deep in muck. Among them was the lord's steward, who happened to spot young William wrestling a calf twice his size back into a pen. Not many lads would dare such a thing. The steward laughed, clapped him on the shoulder, and said the boy had more grit than half the stable hands at court. So began the smallest crack in the wall between William and a life spent hunched over a plow. The old man leans forward, elbows on his knees, voice dropping as though confiding a cherished secret. The steward took him on, just to help in the stables at first. But soon enough, William was learning to curry horses, to strap saddles, to keep armor oiled and shining. Before long, he was running beside the knight squires, carrying messages, fetching practice lances, listening with hungry eyes whenever they spoke of battles fought on faraway fields. You can almost see it, a boy with straw-colored hair, eyes bright with dreams too large for the narrow lanes of his birth. Mornings spent sweeping out stalls, evenings lingering at the edge of the training yard to watch young nobles drive their blunted swords against shields, sparks flying in the dusk. A world of banners and crests, of spurs and shining mail, opening before him like the first blaze of sunrise over dark hills. And then, your neighbor says, his voice softening with something close to wonder, they made him a page. Can you believe it? A peasant's son, eating at the tables of men who owned half the valley. Cleaning their boots, aye, but also learning their ways. How to stand straight, how to speak so his words landed with weight. By the time he was 15, he could read a bit, well enough to puzzle through prayers anyway, and he could ride better than most boys born to the saddle. The man shifts, settling his weight against the cottage wall, the ghost of a smile lingering under his wiry beard. Years later, he went with the Lord's son to Normandy. Some say he was squire by then, carrying the young master's shield into skirmishes, watching how lines formed and broke on muddy fields. Some say he even saved his master's life when a band of raiders tried their luck near the coast. Took a spear through the arm, didn't let go of his sword until the last of them fled. The old man falls quiet for a moment, eyes turned inward. Then he chuckles, low and rueful. What became of him after? Hard to say for certain. Tales grow in the telling. Some swear he rose so high he was granted a small holding of his own, a few fields, a stone house, tenants to call him my lord. Others claim he died on some foreign field, far from the hedges and lanes that first shaped him. He lifts one shoulder in a shrug that seems to carry both pride and a faint regret. Either way, the boy who once wrestled calves in the mud found a road none of us thought lay open. And I suppose that's the trick of it. Sometimes fortune slips through a crack when no one's watching, and a simple lad's name gets whispered in halls he never dreamed of. The words hang between you in the cool morning air. Around you, the village continues its slow dance of chores and errands, oblivious to this brief window into another life. You nod your thanks, feeling something gentle and hopeful stir inside. Because even in this place, where most fates seem carved in stone by birth, there are stories like William's, slender threads of possibility that catch the light and remind everyone listening that the world can still surprise them. It's later that same day when the story of young William finds you again, this time by the low stone wall near the village green, where men often gather to mend tools, sharpen blades, or simply swap news that drifts in from roads far beyond their hedgerows. One of them, a stooped fellow with a voice roughened by years of shouting commands at oxen, picks up the tale almost as if the earlier telling had left it dangling in the air, waiting to be claimed. They say that boy, that same William, who started with mud on his boots and hay in his hair, didn't just rise to be a knight or a landholder, he begins, prodding at the coals of a small brazier glowing between them. He rose higher than any of us would dare whisper on a sleepless night, became a duke in Normandy, with banners bearing his crest flying over strongholds from Caen to Rouen. Others nearby shift to listen, hands still busy at their tasks, but heads tilted, drawn in by the quiet gravity of the man's voice. It wasn't handed to him clean, he goes on, turning a blade against a whetstone with careful strokes. Normandy was a nest of vipers back then. Every cousin or ambitious knight with a drop of noble blood fancied he might claw his way to the ducal seat. William had to prove himself again and again, first in petty squabbles, then in skirmishes that left fields littered with broken spears and the wounded groaning till morning. Each time he came out sharper, more certain, less willing to leave fortune to another man's dice throw. His eyes narrow, reflecting the ember's glow. But ambition's a hungry beast. Once it tastes what's possible, it starts gnawing at the edges of a man's sleep. And William's dreams reached across the channel, all the way to England. The others grunt, as if acknowledging some truth they've long carried. You lean closer, drawn irresistibly toward a world of lords and armies that feels both impossibly distant and somehow breathing just beyond the next hill. When the old English king, Edward, God guard his soul, left no clear son to take his place, every noble in Christendom with a scrap of claim started scheming. Harold, an English earl with clever hands and quick counsel, seized the crown for himself. But William believed Edward had once promised it to him, and he meant to collect on that vow. A faint smile ghosts across the speaker's lined face. So he gathered his strength, called on every knight who owed him allegiance, every baron who craved new lands to carve from England's fields. Ships were built by the dozens in Norman ports, their hulls broad and deep, rigged to carry horses as well as men. The harbors bristled with sails until it seemed half of France meant to leap across the sea. Someone near the wall gives a low whistle, shaking his head. And cross they did, landed on England's southern coast, planting Norman standards in soils that had never known them. Harold rushed down from the north, tired from beating back a different threat. Two armies met near a village called Hastings, not much more than a clutch of thatch and sheep paths. The older man's voice falls to a near whisper, yet the space between them seems to tighten. They say it was a hard fight. Harold's men formed a great shield wall on the rise, axes bright in the sun. Normans charged again and again, only to be driven back by roaring Saxons who struck like thunder, smashing shields and splintering lance shafts. But William, he was canny, ordered his horsemen to feign retreat. The English broke their line to chase fleeing knights, hungry to finish it there and then. The speaker's hand hovers, shaping the memory in the air. And that's when the Normans turned, wheeled their mounts around, and smashed into Harold's flanks with a fury no shield wall could hold. By nightfall, the Saxons lay scattered, their king struck down by an arrow no one claimed to have loosed. Silence gathers among the small group. Beyond them, the village lives on in gentle oblivion. A child's laughter skips down the lane. A crow complains from a rooftop. The man draws a long breath. So the boy who once chased stray calves across a muddy yard ended up crowned King of England, robed and anointed in Westminster Abbey, while the stones still smelled of old English blood. His new barons parceled out lands, built mighty keeps on hilltops to watch the folk they'd conquered. And Normandy's tongue found its way into English courts and markets alike. He looks directly at you then, eyes dark and glinting. Funny, isn't it? How fortune can take hold of one thin thread and pull until it unravels the whole cloth of a kingdom. And somewhere in that pulling was William, peasant-born, but with a will like iron hammered hot and quenched in cold water. His words leave you hushed, a slow shiver trailing down your spine. You feel the weight of centuries suddenly close around you, the ghost of armor clinking in your ears, the distant echo of war cries drifting through the lanes. And you wonder just how many quiet villages like this one have been forever changed by the hungry dreams of a single man who refused to accept the lot he was given. Not long after William's triumph at Hastings, the very face of the countryside began to change. It happened slowly at first, like moss creeping over old stones. But soon the hills and valleys sprouted strange new shapes that seemed almost to grow straight from the earth. You see them on your walks beyond the village, massive mounds of piled soil, topped with sturdy wooden towers or stone keeps that catch the sun like pale teeth biting into the sky. Around these mounds stretch deep ditches and rough palisades, newly carved roads twisting towards stout gates where guards stand watch, axes slung across broad shoulders. These are the Normans' castles, the first marks they scratch onto England's skin to declare this land theirs now, to hold fast what they took by blade and clever stratagem. Some rise on old hill forts or Roman ruins, as if the ground itself remembers past conquerors and sighs to cradle yet another. Others break fresh earth, raising sudden ridges where sheep once grazed undisturbed. Within their walls bustle small garrisons, men-at-arms polishing mail or drilling with spear and shield under the barking commands of a grizzled sergeant. Squires run errands through muddy yards, leading sleek war horses to the smith or fetching new lances from the armory. The air rings with the steady clang of hammer on iron, the scent of scorched horn and molten pitch. At first, the locals keep their distance, peering out from hedgerows or low cottage doors, wary of these newcomers whose language twists oddly on their tongues, who bear strange coats of arms on their shields. But soon enough, necessity draws them close. The new lords summon villagers to haul timber and stone, to dig deeper ditches, to erect the outer walls that will someday serve as refuge, or prison, depending on how fortune turns. Payment is meager, a bit of silver, sometimes nothing more than a safe place to shelter should raiders come prowling. Inside the castles, the Normans hold court. Their banners flutter high above the towers, bright with wolves or lilies, lions rampant, or crosses fierce in their simplicity. Beneath these symbols, justice takes on a new accent. Disputes over fields or herds are settled now before stern men who weigh each case with a foreign coolness, dispensing rulings that often favor the bold or the well-connected. Taxes are gathered under new terms, tithes counted out with careful hands that bear rings of hammered gold.
In time, these once alien fortresses become fixtures in the landscape. Markets spring up at their gates. Peddlers and tinkers, drawn by the promise of coin and the steady presence of armed men who can keep bandits at bay. Minstrels wander in to trade songs for supper. A traveling monk sets up a stall to sell small carved crosses, whispering blessings in exchange for a few humble pennies. Meanwhile, the villagers, your neighbors, your kin in toil, adjust as people always do. They bow lower when the Lord rides past in a rustle of fine cloaks, his knights clanking in procession behind him. They plant as they always have, sow as they always have. But now a portion of their harvest fills Norman storehouses, feeding men who wear chain over bright surcoats and speak of battles across the sea. Around evening fires, some grumble softly, recalling days when they owed fealty only to a Saxon earl whose kin lay now in unmarked graves. Others shrug and say this is simply how the world spins. Under one master's heel or another, still the fields must be turned, still mouths must be fed. Yet even in these quiet resignations, something changes. New customs slip into old feasts. New words color the village gossip. A fresh caution tempers laughter when the reeve comes to tally what's due. And looming always on the nearest rise, visible from nearly every door, stands the castle, a constant reminder in timber and stone that the game has shifted, that the land has found new masters who intend to hold it firm beneath their mailed fists. Watching it all, you sense that the building of these strongholds is more than mere defense or pride. They are anchors driven deep into conquered soil, binding the Norman grip not only to the hills and rivers, but to the hearts and habits of the very people who till them. And over time, like ivy on old walls, these structures and the power they represent begin to seem less foreign, creeping slowly into the rhythm of daily life until few can recall a landscape without their sharp silhouettes against the setting sun.
It happens on one of those days when a cart breaks an axle near the castle gate, and you linger, watching men wrestle with the wheel, your eyes drawn inevitably upward to the towers that pierce the sky. By chance, or perhaps by the subtle currents of curiosity, you find yourself welcomed across the drawbridge. A handful of peasants shuffle past you, carrying sacks of grain owed in rent. A guard nods you through, indifferent, more concerned with the long line of merchants waiting to unload bolts of wool and barrels of salted fish. And just like that, you cross under the heavy portcullis and step into another world. Within these walls, the air feels different, charged with something restless and layered in scents unfamiliar to your village lanes. The sharp tang of oiled leather mixes with the sweet drift of roasting meats. Laughter echoes from somewhere deeper in the keep, rolling over the clatter of hooves in the courtyard, where stable hands hurry to water and feed sleek horses draped in colorful heraldic cloth. You stand to the side, half hidden by a stack of straw, watching a knight dismount. His armor gleams even in the dim light, every plate carefully fitted, his surcoat marked by a snarling golden beast. A boy no older than 14 scurries up to take the reins, eyes wide with awe and maybe a trace of fear. Inside the great hall is where the full spectacle of this world unfolds. You slip through a side door and find yourself beneath arched beams blackened by years of smoke. Long tables stretch down either side of a central aisle, laden with trenchers of dark bread, bowls of rich stews, platters of sliced venison glistening with fat. Candles sputter in iron chandeliers, spilling their glow over bright fabrics, heavy silver cups, jeweled brooches that catch the light and throw it back in tiny flashes. Here sit the barons and knights, broad-shouldered men with close-cropped beards, rings heavy on their fingers. They feast with loud cheer, voices booming off the stone. At the head table reclines the lord of the keep, a man whose eyes flick constantly from one corner of the room to another, even as he smiles and toasts his guests. Beside him sits his lady, her gown a waterfall of embroidered velvet, hair netted in gold, a thin chain circling her brow. She listens with half a smile to a minstrel perched nearby, who plucks a harp and sings of battles won and lovers parted by duty. At first glance, it seems nothing but joy. Goblets raised, laughter spilling across the hall, scraps tossed to sleek hounds weaving underfoot. But stay a while, and undercurrents emerge. You notice how one knight's grip tightens around his cup when a rival praises the lord's generosity a little too pointedly. How two men lean close, their voices low and faces carefully bland, only to part with stiff nods that leave a chill in the air. Servants hurry past, carrying pitchers of wine, their eyes lowered, keenly aware of every subtle tension. Later, when the tables have been pushed back and the music grows wilder, couples dance under the leaping torchlight. A young lady's laughter peals like bells as her partner spins her out and reels her back, his hands lingering perhaps longer than propriety allows. In one shadowed alcove, two older knights stand with heads nearly touching, words lost in the din, but their posture sharp, brittle with secrets. Across the hall, a lord's steward counts coins into a small velvet purse, his lips moving silently as he calculates debts and favors owed. You realize then that this place is more than stone and timber meant to guard against the outside world. It is a crucible where power shifts with each whispered promise, each wager laid over dice that rattle across the boards, where alliances are forged not only in open combat, but in sly glances and murmured confidences passed from mouth to ear over cups of dark red wine. As you slip out into the cool night again, the music and laughter chase you to the courtyard. Overhead, pennants flutter on the ramparts, the colors vivid even by moonlight. Somewhere, a woman's voice rises in song, sweet and clear, before falling back into the deeper current of murmurs that never quite still. Standing there, you sense how this castle is both fortress and stage, a place of revelry and rivalry, protection and peril, all woven so tightly together that no one within these walls could ever truly pull them apart. And tomorrow, the sun will rise over these battlements once more, setting new plots in motion, while the kitchens roast fresh game and the hall waits to swallow up another night's intrigues. Your wandering feet carry you far beyond the watchful shadows of castles and the ceaseless murmur of village life, into rolling countryside that lies hushed beneath a gentle sky. Fields give way to stretches of wild heather and small woods where birds chatter unseen among tangled branches. Here, set apart from the lanes of merchants and the roads of knights, you come upon walls of pale stone, high yet welcoming, draped in ivy that spills like green lace from parapet to ground.
A modest archway invites you through. Beyond it lies the courtyard of a monastery, where everything seems to breathe with calm deliberation. The air holds a cooler scent, a mix of old mortar and crushed herbs from nearby gardens. A cloister runs along one side, columns supporting arched walkways worn smooth by countless sandaled feet. Monks in simple robes drift through this space with unhurried grace, their movements as quiet as the flutter of doves. At first you stand motionless, almost afraid to break the stillness. Then the faintest sounds begin to emerge, drawing you deeper. You hear the steady drip of water from a carved basin, the dry rustle of leaves stirred by a tender breeze. Then comes something more delicate still, the careful scratch of quills across parchment. Inside the scriptorium, shafts of light pierce narrow windows, illuminating rows of wooden desks. Here, monks bend over stretched hides of vellum, their heads bowed in concentration. One dips his pen into a tiny pot of ink, then guides it in elegant sweeps across the page, dark lines blossoming into Latin phrases that dance with tiny flourishes. Another traces careful red initials, each curve and angle a quiet hymn of devotion. Close by, a young novice whispers softly under his breath, committing the words to memory as his pen etches them forever into the page. This is a place where time itself seems to pause. The work is painstaking, slow, but the monks bear it with serene purpose, as though each letter is a prayer in its own right, rising invisible and weightless toward heaven. When you step into the adjoining chapel, the change in sound is almost startling. Here the air quivers with voices lifted together in chant. Rows of monks stand in simple stalls, their hoods lowered, faces turned upward, as a Latin hymn flows from their mouths in measured cadence. The tones ripple across the stone, warm and haunting, weaving into arches that vanish high above your head. You do not know the words, yet something in their rise and fall touches a part of you beyond language, a soft place in the soul that aches toward something vast and bright. Kneeling quietly at the back, you close your eyes. The chant seeps into you, loosening burdens you hadn't realized you carried. For these moments, the cares of lords and taxes, of harvests and hearths, fade into a gentle blur. The world is reduced to breath and song, to the distant promise of grace.
Later, as the voices fall silent and the monks disperse to their humble tasks, tending gardens, mixing tinctures in a small infirmary, feeding the poor who wait patiently beyond the gate, you walk the cloister once more. Each worn flagstone seems to whisper stories of devotion lived in small, persistent acts. The copying of sacred texts, the tending of fragile saplings, the offering of bread to hands more weathered even than your own. As you leave, a bell rings somewhere overhead, sending soft vibrations through the stones beneath your feet. You look back to see the sun striking the monastery's walls, turning them briefly to gold. And it occurs to you that while the castles you passed earlier proclaim power in iron and stone, these quiet halls wield a different sort of influence, one born not of force, but of the unwavering conviction that within this careful order, this daily liturgy of humble deeds, lies a glimpse of something beyond the reach of any sword. As your journey continues through scattered hamlets and the bustling fringes of market towns, you begin to sense the reach of the church, not merely in hushed chapels or among monks hunched over sacred books, but woven deep into the very marrow of daily life. Here, faith is not a gentle whisper in the night. It is a great, insistent drumbeat that orders the hours, dictates the seasons, and governs the smallest hopes and fears of every peasant who bends his back to the soil. Everywhere you go, the church's presence stands unmistakable. It is carved in the massive stone facades of cathedrals that rise above villages like silent guardians, their spires stabbing defiantly at the sky. It resonates in the peal of bells that summon the faithful from fields and workshops alike, interrupting toil with their solemn command to pause and reckon with eternity. Even the smallest crossroads seem to host a weathered crucifix or a humble shrine, a silent admonition to remember the fragile tether that binds mortal breath to divine mercy. Yet this influence is not merely spiritual. You hear how the church owns swaths of fertile land, rivaling the holdings of the mightiest barons. Its abbots and bishops sit as landlords in their own right, exacting rents and tithes, sending reeves to measure out grain, to count livestock, to record obligations in crisp ledgers. Villagers who struggle through lean harvests still must scrape together offerings, sometimes pushing families to near ruin to meet demands they dare not question. For to fall behind is to risk not only earthly reprisal, but the dread of something far more lasting.
You pause in the square of one sizable town where an archdeacon's court is underway. Beneath a canopy, clerics in fine robes wade disputes that range from squabbles over narrow strips of meadow to accusations of faithlessness or whispered heresies. A woman stands trembling before them, hands clenched at her sides, eyes darting between the stern faces of her judges and the wooden crucifix that looms over the proceedings. Her voice cracks as she protests ignorance of the wrongdoing laid at her feet. But the priest only frowns, his fingers drumming on the arm of his carved chair. Here, guilt is often assumed the moment suspicion is cast, and innocence must be wrestled free by those with silver enough to grease the path to leniency. Beyond these formal judgments lies a more pervasive authority. You see it in the hollow eyes of villagers as they crowd together on holy days, listening to fiery sermons that paint vivid torments of punishment waiting beyond life's thin veil. Priests speak with righteous fervor of sins that snare even the unwary: greed, idle lusts, a careless word spoken in anger, each transgression laid out in gruesome detail. Tales of purgatorial flames and eternal darkness take root in hearts already heavy with daily struggle. Mothers clutch children closer, old men lower their heads, and young boys glance about with guilty terror, as though devils might be lurking behind the very altar. And so the church holds them in a grip both tender and unyielding. It offers balm for the fearful soul, in rituals that promise forgiveness, in chants that cradle sorrow with beauty too profound for ordinary speech. But always beneath these comforts lies the shadow of consequence. Failed to confess, failed to tithe, failed to obey, and risk the gnawing certainty that eternity waits with teeth bared. Watching all this, you come to see that the Church's true dominion lies not only in lands surveyed or coin counted, but in the quiet tyranny over human conscience. It shapes how peasants weigh their meager choices, how merchants calculate risk, how even knights at their feasts pause to cross themselves before the first bite. The grand cathedrals may stand silent under the sun, but in every heart there echoes the same relentless message, that beyond this life lies a judgment no mortal hand can sway, and all must labor not just for bread, but for the uncertain grace that might spare them an everlasting night. It begins with words carried on the breath of preachers who stand atop barrels in crowded market squares, their voices slicing through the usual din of merchants and gossip. They speak of Jerusalem, the holy city, held by hands that do not honor the cross, of pilgrims harried and shrines defiled.
Their cries are urgent, painted in tones of righteous outrage and glittering promise. For those who take up the cross, they say, sins will melt away, the gates of paradise thrown wide, no matter what deeds stain their past. And so a fervor spreads like fire leaping from rooftop to rooftop.
You witness it first among the townspeople. A merchant who once fussed over the weight of his scales now stands in the square weeping openly as a robed monk ties a small cloth cross to his tunic. His wife clutches his arm, eyes bright with both fear and hope. Nearby, an old blacksmith with shoulders still thick from decades at the forge bends low to let a youth pin a red cross to his sleeve, his broad face set in a grim line that tries and fails to hide his tremble. Boys who only yesterday wrestled in the dust now strut about with scraps of crimson linen sewn awkwardly to their jerkins, boasting that they will see the walls of Jerusalem before a year has turned. Beyond the walls, in the encampments that sprout like wildflowers along the roads, knights gather their retinues. You watch them prepare. Saddles scrubbed to a sheen, hauberks checked link by link for breaks that might betray them in the press of battle. Squires dart to and fro with armfuls of lances, packs stuffed with rations, coils of rope, spare bridles. Horses shift restlessly under the weight of new caparisons marked by bright crosses. Laughter rings out from some quarters, raw, nervous, as young nobles boast of the glory they'll win in far-off lands. But beneath the shimmer of banners and clang of readying arms, unease coils like a waiting snake. Older men who've seen real campaigns stand apart, their eyes clouded, saying little. Mothers press scraps of cloth or small icons into departing sons' hands, then stand in the ruts of the road long after the columns move on, straining to see them a heartbeat longer. When finally the great hosts march southward, the roads churn into mud beneath the sheer weight of bodies and hooves and wheels. Priests walk at their head, lifting reliquaries high so that even those lost in the rear ranks can catch a glimpse and murmur prayers. At night, the vast camps blaze with countless fires. Hymns float above the fields, ragged yet fierce, a river of voices begging for triumph and mercy all at once. Weeks turn to months. Whispers drift back from travelers, of whole towns left hollow along the Rhine after mobs of crusaders fell upon local communities, convinced they could earn salvation by purging their own neighbors first. Of starving bands clawing through foreign farmlands, eating whatever they could seize. Of men who began this journey with shining armor, now shuffling barefoot, cloaks ragged, bellies hollow, yet still driven on by the terrible promise of absolution. At last, word comes that the armies stand before Jerusalem itself, white stones glaring in the sun, walls bristling with defenders who peer down with grim defiance. And then there is no more room for sermons or songs, only the shriek of arrows, the dull crash of rams battering gates, the brutal press of men against walls. You hear later from a weathered knight who returns with eyes sunken and hands that twitch against invisible foes, how they stormed through breaches, swords wet to the hilt, how narrow streets filled with terrified cries, how blood flowed thick enough to darken their boots. He does not finish his tale. He only lowers his head into his hands, shoulders shaking, though no tears come. Still, back in quiet squares far to the north, bells ring to celebrate the victory. Priests give thanks that the Holy Sepulchre rests once more under the cross. New songs are composed to honor those who never returned, painting them in strokes of holy valor that gloss over the harsher truths. And soon fresh callers stand upon their barrels, proclaiming the need for yet more warriors, for other cities to be redeemed, for sins to be washed away on new fields. Watching it all, you begin to grasp the terrible magnetism of this call to arms, how it binds faith and fear, greed and hope in one breathless rush. A promise so mighty that countless souls will trade hearth and kin, soil and certainty, to chase a glimpse of glory, even if it ends amid shattered stones and cries that no prayer can quiet. You first hear of Louis one evening in a roadside tavern, the sort of low-roofed place where the rafters are stained dark by decades of smoke, and laughter drifts up to tangle with the beams. Travelers gather here over jugs of sharp wine or mugs of warm ale, voices weaving together until it's hard to tell one tale from the next. But when a grizzled sergeant begins speaking of a certain night from the valleys of France, the room stills almost imperceptibly. Heads tilt closer, benches creak under the small collective lean. Louis was young when he first pinned the cross to his cloak, the sergeant says, his voice low, meant only for the circle hunched around the splintered table. A second son with little land to inherit, he burned with a fervor that seemed to rise straight from his breastbone. At the village church, he'd knelt so long after Mass ended that old women whispered surely angels kept him company on the cold stones. When the call went out for men to reclaim the holy city, he was among the first to pledge his sword, pressing the hilt to his lips with eyes shining bright enough to shame any candle. He set forth clad in new mail that caught the sun like ripples on water. Behind him rode squires too young for beards and stout men-at-arms who trusted their lord's zeal more than their own reason. They journeyed through cities whose names Louis could scarcely pronounce, over hills where the very dust tasted foreign on his tongue. At each new shrine they passed, he dismounted to pray, certain that every mile drawn from his homeland carried him closer to sainthood. But months on the road wear even holy ambition thin. The sergeant's eyes narrow as he remembers. "The heat out there is something fierce," he mutters, fingertips tracing sweat-warped grooves in the tabletop. "Makes a man's thoughts twist. Food spoils quick. Water turns sour in its skin. And always your eyes are searching the horizon, not for God's grace, but for the gleam of spear points waiting to spill your insides across the dirt." When at last Louis reached Jerusalem, the knight knelt once more, tears carving clean lines through the grime on his face. His men cheered, their throats hoarse, their limbs trembling from exhaustion. But the triumph they imagined did not unfold in psalms and solemn processions. Instead came orders barked by generals eager to secure their prize, lines of soldiers tightening their grips on swords already sticky with old blood. The assault fell hard and fast. Louis charged at the fore, a prayer clamped between his teeth, believing with every hammering heartbeat that heaven surely watched and would guide his blade true. What he found beyond the gates was not holy light, but screams that clawed its stone walls. Women clutching children were cut down as they ran. Fires jumped from rooftop to rooftop, smoke boiling up thick and greasy. Blood spread beneath his horse's hooves until it seemed the very streets bled in protest. That night, Louis wandered the captured city in a daze. A chapel door stood ajar, candle stubs guttering on an altar stained darker than wine. He sank to his knees, waiting for some whisper, some gentle confirmation that this carnage was righteousness fulfilled. But only silence met him, deep and hollow, pressing against his ears until he trembled. The sergeant draws in a breath, eyes shuddering, as though to keep out memories that still knock against his ribs. "Louis came home different," he finally says, "quieter. You'd see him sometimes staring into a brazier, watching the coals with a look that made you wonder if he wasn't trying to see something far beyond the flames. He still rode to Mass, still bent his head for the blessing, but when the priest spoke of paradise won through sacrifice, he'd flinch, like the words were knives." The story trails off into a space that no one around the table rushes to fill. Somewhere, a lute picks up a soft tune, and a serving girl sets down another pitcher with a hollow clunk. You find your hands tight around your cup, knuckles pale. Because it's a cruel sort of revelation to realize that a man could march across half the world for a promise of holy light, only to find at the end of his long road the dark taste of ash, and a question that no priest's chant could quite lay to rest: whether the banner of faith sometimes hides a blade just as hungry as any mortal greed. Louis returned not with the triumphant stride of a conquering knight, but at a quiet, measured pace that startled those who came out to greet him. His armor had lost its bright polish, dulled by countless days under a pitiless sun, scarred by blows from enemies whose faces haunted the edges of his memory. The great war horse he once rode so proudly limped slightly, favoring a hind leg that never quite healed from an old wound. Yet it was not these marks of battle that caused villagers to whisper as he passed. It was something in his eyes, a depth that seemed always to be looking beyond the hedgerows and fields, searching for an answer carried on winds no one else could feel. His lands, though tended by faithful stewards in his absence, bore the usual marks of petty neglect and creeping greed. Small tenants complained of taxes squeezed too tightly by minor lords hungry to impress their absent master with full coffers. Paths had grown rough, granaries needed new timbers. Disputes over water rights and grazing boundaries festered because no calm voice had settled them. Where once Louis might have brushed aside these matters, preoccupied with tournaments or hunting, he now moved through his domain with an attentive, almost tender regard. He began first by walking the fields himself, pausing to speak with old men bent double by age, with women who blushed and curtsied, with children who shyly displayed hands cracked from early chores. In each of them he seemed to see something precious and fragile, deserving not merely the casual oversight of a distant lord, but real stewardship. Disputes were heard in the open courtyard of his hall, not hidden behind doors thick with oak and rumor. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did render judgment, it favored fairness over the old customs that always tipped the scales toward noble interests.
Soon, something even more unusual unfolded. Louis sent letters to distant abbeys and learned towns, inviting scholars and teachers to settle on his lands. A small school rose near his manor house, nothing grand at first, just 2 low buildings with clay-tiled moofs and a dusty yard. But within those simple walls, boys from families who had never hoped for more than their father's plows now traced Latin letters under the watchful eye of monks who taught them to read scripture, to cipher accounts, to glimpse worlds far beyond their valley. In the evenings, the villagers would see lamps glowing late from those little school windows, hear scraps of chanting or the dry rasp of debate spilling into the stillness. Sometimes Louis himself sat among them, not as lord, but as one more curious mind, head bent over manuscripts that smelled of ink and old lambskin. He listened as these quiet men argued the nature of justice, the obligations of rulers to the ruled, the fine threads that tie every soul, peasant or prince, to a higher order of mercy. Word spread quickly. Merchants from neighboring regions found safer roads and fairer tolls in Louis's lands, bringing more trade. Craftsmen followed, drawn by opportunity. The poor found themselves less pressed by arbitrary levies, their hearths warmer for it. And so prosperity began to coil its subtle tendrils through the villages, not enforced by swords or threats, but coaxed up like tender shoots from dark soil. Of course, not all his peers approved. Neighboring lords muttered that Louis had grown soft, that too much time spent under foreign skies and foreign doubts had drained the noble marrow from his bones. But he paid them little mind. Those who visited his hall found fewer boisterous feasts, and more evenings where music played softly in the background while thoughtful discussions meandered like gentle rivers through the candlelight. Over time, the people of his domain learned to love their lord with a loyalty deeper than fear could ever inspire. They might not fully grasp the changes stirring in his heart, changes born of distant battles and streets awash in sorrow, but they felt the gentler hand of his rule in their daily bread, and the laughter of children who now learned letters instead of just the grip of a hoe. And though Louis rarely spoke of Jerusalem anymore, those who stood close to him when he prayed could see how his lips formed pleas not for victory or glory, but for wisdom to guide his people with compassion and the grace to do right by them long after the clangor of war had faded into the quiet hum of village life.
You find yourself traveling again, the road winding through countryside that once bustled with carts and herds driven to distant markets, with children darting from hedgerows to chase each other under watchful mothers' eyes. But now the lanes lie eerily open, ruts gathering dust undisturbed, grass creeping in where wheels used to cut deep. The air itself feels wrong, too still, as if holding its breath. Then you reach a village, or rather what remains of one. Doors hang ajar on their hinges, windows gape dark and empty, shutters flapping in a lazy wind that carries no laughter or song. Chickens peck near doorsteps thick with fallen leaves, unclaimed by any housewife. A stray dog trots down the lane, ribs sharp beneath patchy fur, nose low to the ground searching for scraps it may be too late to find. At the edge of the square, you stop. A cart stands there, its bed filled with bodies hastily wrapped in roughed cloth, the outlines of faces and limbs unmistakable even under the coarse covering. Flies gather in lazy, obscene clouds. A pair of weary men work with downcast eyes, lifting another shape from the doorway of what might have once been a cheerful cottage, their hands careful but quick. Neither speaks, neither looks at the other. They move as men who have done this 100 times already, who fear if they pause to weep, the grief will drown them where they stand. Inside one house, the hearth is cold, a pot overturned on the floor where someone dropped it mid-motion. A child's carved toy lies nearby. Dust gathers over everything, the fine veil of abandonment that seems to settle almost instantly when human voices fade. Your chest tightens as you wonder how recently laughter might have filled the space, how swiftly life can empty from walls, leaving only ghosts that whisper in the shifting light. You hear elsewhere of towns sealing their gates, suspicious of strangers, terrified the sickness rides hidden in every traveler's breath. Merchants speak of entire streets where doors are marked with crude signs, warnings daubed in red to keep others away. Priests lead solemn processions through once crowded thoroughfares, swinging censers heavy with incense, the prayers rising in hollow echoes. Some kneel by the dying, offering final comforts whispered through trembling lips. Others retreat behind monastery walls, hoping stone and solitude will guard them where prayer might fail.
Among peasants and townsfolk, terror breeds darker suspicions. Rumors swirl like autumn leaves that certain women, old and alone, tend gardens too green when others' crops wither, or keep cats that watch with unblinking yellow eyes. Accusations of witchcraft flare, flames soon following, and screams that do nothing to stem the plague's advance. In marketplaces once bright with trade, fearful eyes narrow on families of Jews, their distinct dress or customs suddenly twisted into proof of hidden malice. Accusations of poisoned wells, dark rituals, all born from a desperation that seeks anything, anyone to blame for this invisible hand that plucks lives at random. And yet, no scapegoat slows its hunger. The roads grow quieter still. Fields lie fallow, wheat gone to seed under tangles of weed because there are not enough hands left to reap. Orchards shed fruit that rots where it falls. Livestock wander through gaps in hedges, lowing piteously for keepers who no longer come. At night, smoke sometimes rises on the horizon, not from cheerful hearths, but from pyres meant to keep the pestilence from spreading, their acrid tang haunting the air long after the flames have died. Through it all, you witness moments that shine strangely bright against so much shadow. A mother cradles a boy burning with fever, her own breath shallow with sickness, yet her voice low and steady as she hums an old lullaby. Monks move door to door, leaving bread and broth on thresholds, without ever seeing who takes it, the simple offering of mercy needing no thanks. And when the wind sighs through the empty lanes at dusk, it seems to carry with it not only sorrow, but some fragile promise that life, however battered, will find a way to rise again from even this dark harvest. You press on, each step heavy with the knowledge of how easily the world's busy hum can still, how quickly familiar laughter can vanish, leaving only the faint memory of joy lingering in silent, dust-choked rooms. And yet, in that silence, grows a quiet kind of reverence for every breath drawn, every warm hand grasped, every heartbeat that dares to go on in defiance of the waiting dark. In the slow, aching aftermath of the pestilence, the land feels strangely unbound. Entire stretches of farmland lie vacant where once they teemed with laborers and beasts. Villages stand half-deserted, their cottages slumping under sagging roofs, lanes grown thick with nettles. But from this quiet devastation, new voices begin to rise, cautious at first, then with growing conviction. You see it in the fields where peasants gather, not to sow or reap under the watchful eye of a manor reeve, but to meet in hushed councils, weighing together what their sweat is truly worth now that labor is so scarce. The black hoods and rough wool tunics of these farmers do little to hide the spark in their eyes. With so many hands lost to the grave, the surviving workers find themselves needed in a way their fathers never were. Lords desperate to see their fields turned again offer better terms, lighter rents, promises of coin wages instead of dues paid in bushels and hens. Some even try to lock tenants in with old contracts, but these bonds crack under the weight of empty granaries and overgrown pastures. Men who once would have bowed their heads without question now stand a little straighter, bargain a little harder. They whisper of neighbors who packed their belongings on rough carts and set off for towns, seeking masters willing to pay real silver for their skill. A few boldly walk away altogether, abandoning strips of land their families held for generations to try their fortunes beyond the old feudal ties. And it is in those towns, bustling now with an energy almost feverish, that the shape of the world truly begins to warp. Narrow streets echo with the creak of carts laden with barrels of wool, rolls of dyed linen, pungent sacks of spices carried from ships whose tall masts crowd the wharves. Markets swell, stalls overflowing with goods brought from leagues away. Coins change hands in clinks that sound more powerful than any knight's oath. You watch merchants gather beneath colorful awnings, calculating ledgers and drafting contracts with flourishes of their quills. Their clothing grows richer year by year, their homes taller and adorned with carved beams and bright glass. Some of them began life as sons of peasants, but through cunning trade and relentless ambition, they now hold the purses that fund new ventures, mills on swift rivers, fleets that brave distant coasts, even mercenary bands that defend caravan routes better than any sleepy baronial levy. Old lords grumble in their drafty halls, nursing goblets of wine that no longer come so cheaply, muttering of days when a noble's word alone set the value of a man's toil. But their coffers lighten all the same, ransoms and dowries and household extravagances, draining silver faster than dwindling manors can replenish it. Some sell off parcels of land to these very merchants they once scorned, trading broad swaths of soil for the lifeline of gold. And so the ancient pyramid begins to crack. Stones long cemented by tradition shifting under new weight. A man who might have been bound to the fields all his days now haggles in the town square, or apprentices his son to a cooper or a goldsmith instead of seeing him bend beneath a lord's yoke. Guilds form, craftsmen banding together to defend their prices and privileges, to dictate terms once the sole right of nobles. You stroll through streets where these changes hum in every corner. Taverns are alive with laughter in half a dozen dialects, the air thick with the tang of roasted meats and sweet ale. In corners, clerks teach figures to bright-eyed youths who dream not of plowing, but of ledgers and trade routes. Lanterns glow late into the night in workshops, where apprentices labor over delicate engravings or experiment with new dyes that set foreign merchants talking. The rhythm of life quickens, not tied to the slow churn of plow and harvest, but to the eager beat of commerce and invention. Looking on, you sense that something vast and irreversible is underway. The old feudal web that once held every serf, knight, and baron in their ordained place begins to unravel, thread by thread, drawn apart by hands that seek something beyond inherited duty. What rises in its stead is still raw, unshaped, brimming with both peril and dazzling promise. A world where wealth might root itself in bustling squares rather than in shadowed castle halls, where clever minds and bold risks carve paths once denied by the accident of birth. It happens in a bustling port town, its crooked lanes teeming with shots and laughter that echo off timbered facades painted in bright, peeling colors. The air is thick with the brine of the harbor, mingled with sharper notes. Spices you can't name, fresh pitch on ship hulls, and the sweet yeast of warm bread carried by passing girls balancing trays on their heads. You pause beneath a striped awning to watch sailors unload crates from a broad-bellied cog that's only just nudged against the quay. They joke in a jumble of tongues as they heave barrels onto waiting carts, their shirts clinging damp to sun-browned backs. Nearby, hawkers crowd the docks, eager to pounce on new arrivals, thrusting bolts of cloth and trays of tiny glazed sweets at travelers who try to wave them off with good-natured exasperation.
It's there you meet Guillaume, a merchant with a beard oiled and trimmed finer than any noble's, a sapphire pinned at his collar that catches every stray shaft of light. His eyes dance as he speaks, hands constantly in motion as though sketching the maps that clutter his thoughts. He notices your curious gaze, and with a conspiratorial grin, beckons you aside. "Look there," he says, pointing to a wagon covered in rough canvas. "Indigo from the Indies, so deep it could drown a man's thoughts. Cost me nearly a third more this year, with all the squabbling in the Levant driving up levies, but the weavers in Bruges will pay twice that to dye their wool the shade of midnight." His voice lowers to a rich murmur as he leans closer. And next to it, pepper, worth its weight in silver, they say, grown under suns that would roast us alive, picked by hands no Christian eye has ever seen. Yet here it is, to grace a bishop's feast table or preserve a rich man's venison through winter. He laughs then, the sound bright and full. "Once I thought I'd follow my father into the fields, counting the yield of barley and dreading each late frost. Now I dream in ledgers and trade winds. I've a partner in Venice who writes of ships laden with strange fruits and brass astrolabes etched finer than any saint's reliquary.
He hints at scholars there who talk of the earth itself as a sphere, spinning in a dance older than any king's line. Can you imagine such things? Ideas more daring than any sword thrust? His eyes narrow, not with suspicion, but with a sort of gleaming ambition. And why not? The old lords still feast on boar and boast of their lineages, but their coffers grow thin. Meanwhile, I buy a cargo of Flemish linen and sell it in Genoa for twice the sum, then bring back bolts of damask so soft even queens would envy them. I've gold to lend to nobles who once would not have given me the time of day. And with each coin they pay in interest, they bind themselves tighter to men like me. He gestures around the crowded square, his rings flashing. Look at this place. Apprentices learning sums instead of sewing. Guildmasters bargaining over who sets the price of shoe leather or wool. Pilgrims and sailors swap tales of wonders far beyond our shores. Their words sowing seeds that may yet grow into ventures no baron could ever control. Then, with a sudden mischievous smile, he clasps your shoulder. I will tell you this. I have no ancient coat of arms to hang over my hearth, no grandfather's sword rusting on the wall, but I have ships, ledgers thick with promissory seals, and a mind ever hungry for what lies just beyond the next horizon. In this new world that stirs like a babe yet unborn, that may count for more than any noble birthright. He tips his hat and vanishes into the swirl of buyers and criers, leaving you standing amid the crush of bodies, your thoughts alight with visions of distant ports, where foreign tongues call out from painted balconies, where fortunes rise and fall not by birth or blade, but by the daring of those willing to chase the far edges of the known world. And it occurs to you that perhaps you've just glimpsed the shape of a new age, shimmering there between the wagons stacked high with saffron and silk, waiting for bold souls to seize it. It is near dusk when you approach the towering shape that dominates the heart of yet another city. A cathedral so vast it seems less built by human hands than conjured from the bones of the earth itself. Its spires climb toward the sky with arrogant grace, piercing low clouds now dyed copper by the sinking sun. From the square below, your neck aches as you tilt your head back to take it all in. The intricate carvings of saints and sinners twined around doorways, gargoyles frozen in mid-grimace, tongues and claws reaching out as though to snatch at passers-by. You step inside, and the air closes around you, cool and almost heavy, infused with incense that seems to cling to your very skin. Your footfalls echo off soaring pillars that stretch up and up until they vanish into a dim forest of ribbed arches. Here, light filters not in broad, honest beams, but through panes of colored glass so vivid they almost burn to look at. Sunlight breaks against ruby cloaks, sapphire halos, emerald fields where golden lambs graze under the watchful eyes of angels. As you move, these images shift subtly, saints and martyrs seeming to turn their gazes to follow you, their solemn eyes bright with mysteries you cannot begin to name. Near the entrance stretches a labyrinth laid into the stone floor, a winding path traced in pale marble against darker slabs. You watch pilgrims shuffle along it on their knees, lips moving in silent prayer, hands clutching rosaries that spill from their fingers like tiny chains.
Some weep openly, tears shining on cheeks gone pale with fatigue and awe. Others smile through their trembling, as if each step draws them closer to something they've long yearned to touch.
Closer to the high altar, you hear the low murmur of voices that have nothing to do with the priests chanting their Latin office. Merchants and nobles stand in tight knots, heads bowed together, trading urgent whispers. A woman grips her friend's sleeve, eyes wide as she speaks of a miracle said to have unfolded just last month. A statue of the Virgin weeping real tears that tasted of salt, witnessed by a dozen devout souls. Yet in the next breath, her voice drops to a fearful hush as she recounts dark rumors. A mason who mocked the saint's relics, found days later in the river, his body twisted in a way no natural current could explain. You drift along the side aisles, hand brushing cold stone still faintly slick from centuries of countless palms. Candles gutter before small altars, each flame a fragile petition that quivers in the drafts. In niches stand reliquaries crusted with gold and jewels, shaped like miniature palaces, each holding splinters of bone or fragments of cloth said to have brushed the skin of holy men and women. Here faith takes on a sharp, almost feverish edge, a mingling of awe and dread that seeps into your marrow. These treasures promise blessings to the pure, but also whisper of curses laid upon the arrogant, of pestilences sent to humble the proud. Above it all, the vaulted roof gathers your small human breath into its cavernous hollows, sending it back as a ghost of a sigh. When the choir begins to sing, their voices swell and break against the stone like waves upon a cliff. The music spirals up through the gloom, gilding the shadows with a beauty so fierce it nearly hurts to hear. You close your eyes, letting the sound pour through you, lifting all your private fears and unspoken desires into a vast current that seems to flow toward heaven itself. When at last you step back into the evening light, it feels almost too bright, too ordinary. The cathedral looms behind you, its stained glass windows now dark eyes that keep their secrets. You walk away with your heart still beating to the echo of hymns and whispers, haunted by wonders that promise grace, yet remind you, with every shadowed corner and sorrowful saint's stare, how narrow is the path between mercy and the cold hand of judgment. Beyond the towering gates of the old city, past markets still heavy with the scent of salted fish and sun-warmed leather, a different kind of hum has begun to stir, one that does not revolve around tolls or tithes or even the measured cycles of planting and harvest. Here in the winding streets that thread through rising districts of merchants and artisans, something new is taking root, sprouting quietly between the cobblestones where fear once grew unchecked. You first notice it in the sharp scent of ink drifting from narrow workshops whose doors stand wide to the sun. Inside, men bend over presses fashioned from sturdy timbers and iron screws, guiding sheets of paper beneath carved wooden blocks smeared black with letters. When the press's heavy plate descends, it makes a sound both solid and hopeful, like a hammer forging the future. Fresh pages peel away, their crisp columns of print multiplying prayers, tales, and newly argued philosophies faster than any monk's careful hand ever could. Outside, young apprentices with stained fingers stack the drying sheets, eyes bright with the knowledge that they are midwives to thoughts that will travel leagues farther and faster than even the most tireless preacher. Already pamphlets spill across tavern tables, carried in saddlebags by traders, tucked under arms by wandering scholars who delight in debate more than any swordplay. In small halls and shaded cloisters, you see groups gathered around earnest speakers, not priests delivering homilies on the dangers of temptation, but thinkers who speak of humankind itself. They quote lines from rediscovered scrolls brought north from Italy, marveling at how long-dead Greeks and Romans once dared to reason that the mind might probe mysteries once left only to divine decree. They talk not of demons lurking in shadows, but of proportion, perspective, of the wondrous faculties of memory and invention that lift mortals above mere beasts. Their words float on the air like lanterns loosed at dusk, delicate and glowing with possibility. Elsewhere, painters stand before rough canvases, palettes crowded with pigments more brilliant than any medieval wall's somber saints. They study each other's hands, the play of tendons beneath skin, the way sunlight kindles copper glints in a girl's unbound hair. You watch one artist sketch a figure from behind, just a young man seated on a worn stone, yet rendered with such attentive grace that it seems a quiet celebration of simple existence. Later, he pores over a battered marble torso brought from some collapsed Roman villa, tracing its weathered contours with reverent fingertips, searching for truths the ancients once held close. In these streets, laughter rings freer. The old fears of plague and eternal damnation still haunt memories, of course. Scars never vanish outright, but they no longer rule every breath. Festivals spill into avenues, rich with masks and music, with dancers whirling in bright ribbons that echo the new painting's colors. The church still stands, its bells calling the faithful to prayer, but even priests now commission portraits of themselves, smiling, hands resting on books as much as on rosaries. Watching all this, you sense how the heavy weight of the medieval night is lifting. The mind, once bound by dread of dark forces and the rigid chains of inherited station, begins to stretch toward light like a sapling long trapped beneath a dense canopy. Curiosity becomes a virtue rather than a sin. Wealth, once merely a means to raise armies or ransom kin, now flows into patronage of learning and creation, birthing schools, libraries, circles of poets who dream aloud of harmony, both human and cosmic. And though uncertainty still prowls at the world's edges, it is met less with trembling and more with wonder, as if people have begun to believe that within themselves might lie the spark to illuminate the vast unknown, to chart new seas not just with compass and sail, but with brave, questioning hearts. Here, standing amid printers' cries and scholars' heated exchanges, you feel the fragile thrill of an age awakening, blinking toward a dawn not imposed by fear, but coaxed forth by the bright, ungovernable promise of human thought. You awake with a start, breath catching in your chest as if you'd been running through narrow medieval lanes only moments before. But there is no chill of damp stone walls here, no scent of wood smoke or livestock pressing close. Instead, the quiet of your familiar room surrounds you, walls painted in soft hues, a window where the glass is smooth and flawless, humming gently with the modern world beyond. A faint light blinks from a screen nearby. The subtle whir of appliances you scarcely think about fills the background like a hidden orchestra. For a long moment you simply lie there, eyes tracing the ceiling's clean lines, feeling the softness of the mattress beneath your back. Your heart is slow to calm, still echoing with sounds that have no place here, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the solemn chant of monks drifting through stone cloisters, the distant thunder of hooves on open fields. As you sit up, stretching muscles that strangely ache from labors you never performed, an unexpected warmth spreads through your chest. You find yourself remembering the faces of peasants who stooped over rough soil with quiet dignity, the determined glint in a merchant's eye as he spoke of ships bound for lands he'd never seen, the hush that fell inside cathedrals when colored light bathed upturned faces. Even the whispers of fear, of plague, of judgment, of battles waged over distant promises seem now like threads woven through a vast tapestry that somehow includes your own bright, fragile strand. Rising, you move through your home with slow steps,
fingertips brushing across everyday marvels, a tap that spills clean water at a twist, shelves lined with books printed so cheaply and abundantly that you can pluck the wisdom of 100 lifetimes with casual ease. Your phone rests on a table, a gateway to voices and images from every corner of the planet, something that would have seemed a miracle to the scholar copying Latin by candlelight.